Let's talk about Turning Point's brands. I think it's a decent stock. We will take a look at some of the statistics regarding this company. But first, how did I find this stock? Well, I went to the stock screener that you can see here on macro trends, and I put in no minimum on market cap and maximum 1 billion with a price to earnings ratio between 0.1 and 10. And then I just took a look at companies that was in the stock screener, companies that was matching, and one of those stocks was Turning Point Brands. There were quite a few that I pressed on to take a look at, but I didn't get so good vibes. One was a gaming development company that reminded me a lot of Starbreeze in Stockholm, which was, not a good story in that case. So I decided to skip that and instead make a video on Turning Point Brands, which I have a much better feeling regarding. If we take a look at stock price, we can see that in the era of cheap money and booming macro environment, we can see that the stock was trading at just slightly above $50 in the peak time here, and now it has dropped by more than 50% since those days. Is this warranted? Well, we can take a look at revenue and profit and judge for ourselves. In terms of revenue, we can see that revenue was increasing in the past, although it seems to be slightly decreasing now, and that's not good in an inflationary times. It seems to be quite stable though, and maybe a bit cyclical as well. If we look at year-over-year quarterly growth, we see that they have had periods of decline in the past, and then they came back with growth after that, and now there seems to have been a period of decline here in growth on revenue. Not good indeed. Although, what's going on with profitability? Let's take a look at earnings per share real quick for Turning Point's brands. We can also see that earnings per share has been up and down a lot. There does not seem to be any trend regarding increasing or decreasing earnings per share for this company. 0.58, 0.53. It's quite all over the place, even with a quarter with some negative earnings per share. I'm quite sure there's a good explanation for this. Some investment, some big dividends. We need to do further research in order to understand that. All right, let's take a look at dilution as well. So how do we find this out? Well, we take a look at shares outstanding and see, is the number increasing, decreasing? Are they doing buybacks? Are they issuing more shares? And we can see the amount outstanding here over, a long period of time indeed. And it's easier if we take a look at the growth here. So we can see that they did some new issuance in the past. They increased by quite a lot in the amount of shares outstanding. Although in recent times here, they seem to have been buying back stocks. Is this a sign that management thinks that the company is undervalued? Could potentially be. Remember, it's 50% cheaper now than at its peak. So those are interesting numbers, and they don't seem to need financing at current times. What does this company do? Well, they produce tobacco products. So for example, Zigzag here, it's a rolling paper used for the cigarettes. And then they also have Dip here, for example, Stockers. Sold a lot in Middle America, seems to be quite a stable market, and they also have American measurement with ounces here in terms of how big the cans are. So it's a tobacco product. It has a stable place in everyday consumption for a lot of Americans, according to revenue figures, although slightly declining. Maybe that's a result of people choosing to vape more and choosing other alternatives of tobacco consumption, or perhaps an increasing awareness regarding the health risks with smoking. Do I think that we will see a lot of political headwind? No, not necessarily. If we look at smoking, if we look at tobacco, it's actually a net positive on society. If we look purely from an economic perspective, there was a study made in Finland regarding this, And yes, indeed, in the beginning we see increased health care costs for society in, for example, Nordic countries with regards to tobacco usage, although smokers tend to die 8.8 years earlier than the average person, and those are at the end of a person's lifespan when they require the most support in terms of social insurances and pensions and all these kind of things. So it's actually in economic terms a big gain for society if more people smoke and use tobacco products, and I think that legislation will form around that as well, and that's might be one of the big reasons why we don't see a ban on smoking and tobacco at large. So I think this has a place in society. I don't see a big political risk. I see stable revenue, I see profitability, and in terms of value for money, I think that Turning Point's brands is, it could potentially be a very stable investment that will yield, a 100% return on the next 5 years. When the market turns on its head and starts to be positive again and people don't see all that negativity, well, then we see that prices have a lot of upside compared to in the past. We looked at this high of above 50, and that was at the time when we had some slight revenue growth. So if we see revenue growth once again for Turning Point's brands and we see continued profitability, well, then there's a lot of upside indeed. There's another American tobacco company that I like more though. It's called Vector. They're selling cheap cigarettes, and then they're using those profits to invest in property. So I think that's quite a nice strategy, and the stock has not done a whole lot in recent years, so that's another one for you to check out. Just doing some hype for that stock here at the end on this video for Turning Point brands, which I think will be a stock that will produce slightly higher than market returns in the years to come. Alright, that's been it for this video, and as always, hope you guys make a ton of money, whatever investments you decide to make. Take care now. Bye bye.